If I started a denomination of Christianity as an anthropomorphic tree that was tardy to events on a regular basis, I could call that denomination Latent Christianity. Have any of you noticed that even after you leave Christianity, there are parts of you that are still kind of Christian? It seems that there's like a set of bags that we've packed into our metaphorical overhead compartments and brought them with us into other areas of our lives, even after we might have left the faith. Many pagans today are ex-Christians of one sort or another, and our Christian histories come with varying degrees of influence on our thought that vary from cultural background noise informing our perspectives to even abuse that's translated to trauma. I coined the term latent Christianity and made a video on it some time ago, kind of introducing the concept a little bit. To recap, latent Christianity is the social and emotional baggage associated with Christianity that sticks around even after you leave the religion.
Oh, what a glorious day that it is that the Lord has given us today. Hi there. I'm the social and emotional baggage that comes with being raised in a Christian society and growing up in church. I'm here in the back of your mind, and I'm not going to leave. I have no interest in leaving. I'm just going to stay here. Repent or perish. It's your choice.
Ah, the Cthulhu days. But in that video, I focused on orthodoxy, and I wanted to make a video that approaches the concept in a way that covers a little bit more ground, because I think it's a concept that describes a variety of experiences. One thing that I experienced, and I see this fairly often as well, is that latent Christianity can affect your understanding of religion in general, and that you will start looking at religions through a Christian lens, mapping Christian concepts over other religions, often without even realizing it. To give an example of this that isn't really all that obvious, after leaving Christianity, a lot of my spiritual exploration for a period of years was searching for the right faith, because that has to be the case, right? Either one is right and the rest are wrong, or they're all wrong. No other options. It took me a while to reframe that a bit and start looking at religions as their own thing rather than competing assertions of truth. Now, I look at the various religions of the world as contributing ideas about spirituality, each with their own perspectives and values, which is a far more pluralistic view than what I'd held earlier in my years after leaving Christianity, which was a far more exclusionary view, informed by Christianity's perspective on itself as the one true faith. That perspective had thwarted my ability to look into other religions because the values I had weighted were meaningless in the grand scheme of things. And I think that sometimes this can apply in reverse, that Christianity can be so overwhelming, that our experiences with it can be such that once we're out, we reject spirituality as a whole. Now, my journey through Christianity included three very distinct forms of it: Southern Baptist, Episcopalian, and then Celtic Christianity. And the toxic elements of it that I saw were in the Southern Baptist iteration, the other two not so much, such that after I left, I didn't really bear much ill will toward Christianity itself, but mainly because I don't think that Christianity really has a succinct definition. However, I do recognize that in American culture especially, Christianity can have an abusive face. I've experienced it both as a Christian and as a pagan, and from that, I completely understand the perspective that a lot of atheists have, where the behavior from Christians expressing the most toxic elements of their faith can cause people to reject religion or spirituality completely, basically getting harassed out of seeing any value in any of it. And sometimes this can manifest as religious trauma that affects us when we move to another faith. Prayer, for example, can be hard for a lot of pagans, especially heathens, where we often have this idea that heathens don't pray, or proudly pushing against Christian concepts by saying that heathens don't pray to the gods but see them as equals. I'm not entirely sure where this originates, but it doesn't bear out in history. It seems largely an attempt by some heathens to distinguish themselves from Christians. There's this idea that Christians pray, and the way they pray is an act of subservience, and therefore we should not do that. While I agree that the Christian concepts of submission in its various iterations are unhealthy, I don't think that translates to the concept of prayer in general, or seeing the gods as greater than us as we pray to them. We can still pray and acknowledge the vast presence of the gods as we replace unhealthy submission with a healthy respect and reciprocity. And that's a happy medium between another reaction on this subject which can come up, which is the fear that we aren't praying or offering enough because the gods will be upset with us if we don't. And that as we fall short in our praxis, that we are losing something akin to the Christian concept of salvation. Which gets to how we might format our relationship to the gods in a Christian mindset. The Christian God, by any reasonable measure, is abusive. And he touts himself as this omnipotent and omniscient creator of all things, and then proceeds to make himself extremely difficult to find, and then blames you when you can't find him, measuring which afterlife of two that you go to on the basis of whether or not you gave your soul over to him in spite of this, and then claims that this is saving you. Saving you from what, you might ask? Well, from what he'll do to you if you don't play his abusive game. And this deity is, as far as I can tell, the only one who puts forward a threat like this, especially based on something so arbitrary as a specific act of gifting your soul rather than how you lived. Speaking within heathenry, our gods do not seem to be various versions of the Christian God. They certainly aren't omnibenevolent, but they do seem to be more concerned with how you live rather than demanding your soul so they can send you to their personal afterlife lest they set your soul aflame for all eternity, or whatever entirely reasonable punishment that specific branch of Christianity has in mind for maybe not buying that a specific person in history was the human iteration of the creator of the universe, and that this means you need to give him your soul because you thought about sex once. The further away I get from Christianity and yet remain religious, the more ridiculous this seems. But it took me a while to realize that the gods outside of Christianity aren't just a multiplicity of what Christians see as God, but as different characters. They are, in fact, entirely different, and should each be looked at within the context of their own stories. But, speaking of hell, that can certainly be a way that latent Christianity manifests. In fact, I think it's likely the most common thing that ex-Christians reference when they talk about what parts of Christianity might haunt them after they leave the faith, be they atheist, agnostic, pagan, etc. There's a cryptic feeling after leaving Christianity that no matter how unjust this abusive game might be, that it might just be the reality of what we're dealing with in a universe created by a God who happens to think this system of salvation is a good idea. This is something I dealt with. This is essentially the basis of Pascal's wager, which is essentially emotional manipulation that preys on this feeling that you might have as an ex-Christian. If you had no concept of hell prior to engaging with Pascal's wager, you would likely think that it's a rather ridiculous false dichotomy. But instead, it's predicated on latent Christianity in the form of that fear of hell, and has no argument other than the simple axiom of the existence of an abusive deity. And beyond that, many of those traditions that are related to Christianity will send you to hell if you don't believe in the right one. So, it's not really that helpful, is it? But, the reason for this is that the belief in this hell concept is largely limited to those traditions. And polytheistic faiths, that have punishment afterlives of whatever sort, are not based in belief or salvation in the Christian sense. Beyond that, the afterlife is often not the focus of the religion. Valhalla, for example, is not an afterlife that is sought after, nor is it really a Viking heaven of sorts. It's simply one afterlife of many that serves a specific purpose for a specific subset of people. The afterlife, from the Norse perspective, is broadly simply a place where you are reunited with your ancestors, and where your achievements in life are celebrated, and presumably another chapter begins. Whether or not this afterlife exists is not something of heavy consequence. From the perspective of the heathen, if the afterlife exists, we will be pleasantly surprised. If it doesn't exist, well, we won't be upset. One of the things that fuels the fear of hell that we have in the first place, however, is the purity culture concepts that we experience from Christianity. Concepts such as original sin, or the idea that because all have sinned, that we all deserve eternal torment. These are concepts that are fairly unique to Christianity and related faiths. The purity culture element is something that I also find to be increasingly ridiculous the further and further I get from my life as a Christian. Something that helped me unpack it for myself has been investigating the attitudes on purity in other faiths. The main through line that I've found is that it's associated essentially with cleanliness. And the approach to cleanliness from a spiritual perspective is similar to a physical perspective and often involves something fairly simple like a ritual washing of hands. So it's there, but it's nowhere near as extreme as the Christian view, which requires the sale of your soul in exchange for a chance at purity in a game that's designed for you to lose on the basis of things like thought crimes, which, I don't know, man. Jesus said this stuff, and Christians teach it. Furthermore, importing Christian notions of purity into a religion like heathenry, which has a gender-fluid high god like Odin, doesn't really track that far. It's just incompatible. But that doesn't stop our Christian past from rearing its ugly head from time to time and plaguing us with that cultural background noise. And because of that, this is something that simply takes time to process and unlearn, be that if you're journeying from Christianity and into a new religion, or simply out of Christianity, these challenges will appear. And half the battle is simply identifying it. Honestly, even if you were never a Christian, but you just lived in a culture heavily influenced by Christianity, this stuff still shows up. And a lot of times you don't even notice it. And the big thing to keep in mind is that you're not alone. This is incredibly common. Sometimes simply bringing it up with another ex-Christian, that there's an element of latent Christianity that you're dealing with, can result in a conversation that just helps. So, let me know down in the comments if this resonates with you and how latent Christianity may have affected you. I'll bet that many of your stories are quite similar, and perhaps, down in the comments, some of you might realize an element of latent Christianity that you hadn't noticed before, until someone else pointed it out. And with that, hail to my patrons for making this content possible. It's good to have people at your back. Click the like and subscribe button for their shining purity. And of course, tell the bell it's going to hell. And remember to find a way or make one.